Hi. What you see before you here is a very complicated mosaic, and what I'm going to do is explain to you how this works, why it was developed, and what it did for us. The problem we were dealing with was the development of the planning strategy for the improvements of Oriole Park. It could have been any park. And I'll just let the brief slides run behind as I talk here to give you a sense of what the work was we were dealing with. Ultimately, though, the problem was with all the decisions we had to make about the physical park and how it would be changed by new activities being introduced into it, and therefore how we should look at welding all this together into a comprehensive solution, that the most outstanding part of it all was the diversity of activity and use that occurs in the park in general. We found this to be a stumbling block, and we tried to imagine how, for instance, we could perhaps do some activity study as you might do a traffic study. But we realized in the end that this would involve having somebody look at it, all the different areas at the same time throughout the day, the week and weekends, over the seasons, and the entire year. Obviously was an impossibility. And therefore, this is how we came upon this indicative schedule as a means to articulate and provide a framework that expressed all these characteristics, and upon that we could hang our decisions. So let's get started. We'll start with a blank sheet of paper. Instead of numerical analysis, we're going to very simply utilize three categories. There's little to no activity, we'll show that as being simply nothing. Where there's medium activity, we'll mark it with a simple square. And when there's extensive activity, we'll do that with a long bar. There's a winter period of 2 months, and then on each side of it there's early spring 2 months and late fall 2 months. Beyond that there's 2 months of late spring and 2 months of early fall, and then there's 2 months of summer. The next parameter is to clock the time, and we show that across the top on our sheet of paper here. And we identify different characteristics of weather. There's good weather, there's bad weather, and there's precipitation. There are weekdays and weekends, and there's different characteristics of behavior and activity that occur. Then we show on the right from babes in arms through toddlers with parents, then youth with parents, youth, teenagers, young adults, middle-aged, and seniors. And again, there are activities which are not dependent upon age. And these include such things as the dog walkers, the foot traffic that goes through the park in general, the active recreation of joggers, walkers, and bicyclists. Then there are group organized sports, and then there are the problematics that occur in a park. All of these make up a total of 6 dimensions within which we can categorize the degree of activity that is occurring following that simple assessment of little to no activity, medium activity, and extensive activity. Let's take a look at charting these users now. Our first category of user are babes in arms. They're in the park weekday and weekend because they're not in school, but they tend not to be there in the winter, in the coldest weather, or when it's inclement. Our next group is toddlers with parents, at which point they're now mobile on their own, and they do require more outdoor time. Again, they're not in school, so we see them weekday and weekend. Next, we have youths with parents. They're much more mobile, and again, we see a longer duration. But now at this point, we find that they're in school, and again, they're being with parents limits it to primarily being weekend activity. Our next group are youths who are self-propelled, more or less. Their duration of time extends further during the day, and we see them in the park throughout longer or more extensive periods of time. Teenagers are totally independent of parents, but they are in school. We find here again that their duration of time extends into the evenings. We see them less in the mornings. Their activity level is greater, and they start to get organized into sports, etc. Young adults are essentially without children, but they are working, and they are a very active group, and we find that they appear throughout the day and the evening, but primarily on weekends. Middle-aged, again, are working, and they have many obligations as well. Often they are actually with children, and this starts to see their time gets clustered around that. Seniors are generally less mobile, and therefore they are less apparent in the park in inclement weather. Now I've taken here all these different users and put the mosaic together, and what it describes is generally an intensity of use, and we see here that the summertime is the busiest, and the shoulder seasons of late spring and early fall with good weather, particularly on weekends, accounts for considerable activity. Now, if we move from user type to activity type, we start to see different patterns occur. Be no surprise that with dog walkers that there is a regimentation here, that dogs demand that they be taken out at all times. So we see them every day, regardless of season, regardless of weather, and these are spread out throughout the day and the evening, although there are clusters of time, and this happens more often on weekends. Similarly, there's a pattern of foot traffic to the park. In this instance, the park is a route from the apartment buildings to the transit, so we can see here that in the general traversing of the park, for whatever reason, there is that intensity in terms of the morning and the afternoon commute to work. Active use, we're looking at joggers and the walkers and the bicyclists. These tend to be throughout the year, more significantly on weekends than on weekdays, and we can see that they take advantage of the longer hours of sunlight in the late spring, early fall shoulder, and as well the summer season. Organized sports, since there is no hockey arena facility in the park, is basically related to summer sports, and these by their nature organize themselves substantially around the summer and the shoulder months. And these take into consideration more time on the weekends than the weekdays. Lastly, we have the problematics, and these generally are the experiences of late night carousing in the park, and during the day we see there are conflicts that dogs get into with other activities in the park. So we see this primarily on weekends in the summer, throughout the day and in the evenings, and again we see this in the late spring, early fall shoulder seasons when the weather is good and we have a high degree of population in the park. If we take all these activities and put them together into a mosaic, an aggregation, we see again, as before, that the highest concentration is in the summertime, and particularly on weekends, and in the late spring, early fall shoulder season, it is in the good weather. And then as we progress into the colder extremes, we see again that this narrows down to more in daylight and in good season weather. Now if we take that earlier mosaic of the users and we combine that with the activities, we end up with this total tapestry. And again, it shows this incredible aggregation of activity in the summertime and in the spring, fall shoulder seasons, in particular on weekends during the daytime. And we can see again a bit of this pattern trickling off as we get into the late fall, early spring, and the winter itself. Now this last slide just puts all the colors together to indicate more clearly the different types of weather. Having built this indicative schedule based primarily on simple observations and presumptions, the calibration of it is done on the basis of actually testing it or truthing it against reality. And we find that you can go out at any time with this schedule and inspect the park and see that it reflects correctly or not what's going on in the park. And it's quite surprising how accurate it is. I think one of the most remarkable ones was shortly after completing this, and I have the fortune of living on the park, so I'm quite familiar with it. On a beautiful, sunny, Late spring, Sunday afternoon, all hell broke loose in the park. A problematic moment had occurred. What it was, parents with babes in arms and toddlers had decided that they would picnic in the park, beautiful weather, and their dog got in on the food. I look at that as being a perfect truthing that this worked. Besides informing members of the working group of what was truly happening on a dynamic basis in the park, which enabled people to make decisions better, seeing the problem better, it permitted different groups who were interested in participating in the park to identify how they slotted into what was conceived as being a very complicated and busy park. In some instances, it was absolutely amazing to realize that these additional activities could fit into slots where there was really no activity going on, and there was therefore no conflict or contest of introducing these elements into the park program. It's not only applicable to this indicative schedule is readily transferable and adaptable to other park circumstances. Just as readily, the same approach can be applied to other areas of high and dynamic mixed activity, such as the analysis of Main Street environments, or again, looking at transit-rich experiences with a tremendous amount of movement and change. Thank you.